Hey everybody, Javan Bernakevitch here with All Points Design. That's allpointsdesign.ca and regenerativeliving.online. And I am ecstatic, really, to be talking with Natalie Topa. She's coming to us from Nairobi in Kenya. And I had the opportunity to be introduced to Natalie through a mutual friend of Zach Weiss. And when I started to look at Natalie's work, I was floored at the scope and the attention to detail that Natalie gives to her work in working with communities at risk, working with communities at large, all over the world, but now largely in East Africa for the last 17 years. And something that struck me about Natalie was that there's this way, Natalie, that you speak with a lot of colloquialisms and a lot of common speak to make it really easy to understand things. I know we're going to hear in the presentation today and the case study about prisons for water. We don't usually hear about prisons in the positive, but there's these prisons for water, there's these smile berms, there's a realness to what you do, which I find super refreshing and fun to talk to, and just feels like talking with a friend that I've had for years, and yet we've only had a few conversations. And so I just want to say, first and foremost, everyone, you're in for a huge treat. It's going to be a long conversation. So if you're one of those people that likes a long format, you're in for a treat. I would grab a cup of tea, grab a friend. There's a case study here that takes a flood and turns it into food, takes a mountain that has been so eroded to the point to where there's been loss of life, but also it was so eroded that at certain parts of the year they had to bring in water trucks, even though this land was overflowing with water. And I think this is a great example of how if we don't manage a resource, it becomes pollution, and sometimes that pollution becomes deadly. And so this case study in Burundi is a wonderful way of starting to understand what low-tech erosion controls can look like, what sinking and storing water can look like, and what doing it at a level of regeneration means. We always talk about degenerative, regenerative, and regenerative. Degenerative being less than we had before, generative being the same, regenerative being more. But I think in this example, there's the end stage of regenerative where we're actually building capacity, where it's not just doing good, but it's making sure we become redundant as possible as practitioners and interventionist, and really working alongside the people to build their capacity. And Natalie's going to tell a bit of the story about how they had to evacuate due to COVID, and with videos and wonderful, simple drawings. I just love seeing all the drawings. She was able to continually coach the individuals there to do the work themselves, to build their native understanding of these concepts and really sink it into the landscape. And so without further ado, Natalie Topa, thanks so much for joining me. And I'm just so pleased you've decided to say hello and welcome.
Great, thank you so much, Javan. Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm here in Nairobi, Kenya. I've been living in East Africa for almost 17 years. And in just the 17 years that I've been here, I've actively, with my own eyes, seen landscapes eroding. And when ecologies collapse, they take with them livelihoods, food security, and sometimes peace and stability, right? So I've been working in the context of forced displacement for the whole time I've been here, almost 17 years. And in a previous agency that I was working in, when they started to see sort of the demonstrative projects that I was leading, they said, gee whiz, can we give you $100,000 and just do whatever you want? And so we were trying to establish a presence in Burundi to serve the displacement affected populations there. When I say displacement affected communities, I'm talking about mixed migration. That can be refugees, people who leave their country. It can be IDPs, internally displaced people who stay within their country but move to another town or location. It can be returnees, people who maybe the smoke has cleared and they feel that it's safe to return to their homes and reestablish themselves, but that could be generations later. And then we have the host community, and host community is a bit euphemistic because they're not walking around with trays of welcome drinks. They are communities that are equally resource stretched. They are scarce of resources, whether it's water or food or services, and yet they're having to cohabitate with a population that they may or may not want there, and that population might be cutting down trees and accessing and using resources that that community that lives in scarcity already is, doesn't have enough for themselves to thrive. So everything we do has to be through a conflict sensitive lens. So I'll go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. So I'm calling this presentation Regenerative Design for Disaster Resilience and Food Security in Burundi, from floods to food. That's a term that I came up with to describe exactly what we're doing. We're taking this massive resource of extreme water events, pacifying them and getting those into productive systems to restore a community agro-ecosystem. So my name is Natalie Topa. I live here in East Africa for quite some time, and I'm going to walk us through how working hand in hand with the community using only locally available materials and concepts, no gimmicks, right? Knowledge is the main input. So I'm going to take you through this story. I'm calling it Regenerative Design for Disaster Resilience because we are trying to support the community in their capacity to regenerate and restore actively and get that landscape into autopilot so that they can meet their needs for food, fodder, fiber, fuel, fertility, and pharmaceuticals with an F. So this is part of sort of work that I've been leading in the region, in East Africa, Africa, and the Middle East for years at different scales. I use the term sponge because most people know what a sponge is. It's something that holds and absorbs water and nutrient and can store it for a long time without drying up. So, if we're talking about a very small space food system, like around a refugee shelter or a home or a household, I talk about the sponge gardens, which can be used to cool and shade the house and make people resilient, to extreme temperatures, as well as events like flood and drought. Moving up to the higher level, sponge farms are just what they sound like, moving into the homestead scale, even around the office compounds of NGOs, and the farm level. So how do we design that? How do we do citizen engineering to the whole farm to capture stormwater runoff, as well as hold the runoff, right? So we normally talk about runoff, but we also want that farm to grow arms to reach out to nearby culverts or roads or footpaths and pull that water into the farm, and then make sure that we hold it in that system. And then, of course, if many people start doing this around their homes and in their farms, we now move into sponge camps, like work I've been leading in Uganda, where many of the refugees from South Sudan are each applying these concepts around the home. And little by little, there's a greenification and a resilience to flood and drought at the scale of a village. And then, of course, the sponge watershed, where if households, farms, villages, and camps start to apply these concepts at scale, now we start to get into the catchment level. And it's really important right now. Javan, my biological father's from Ukraine, my mother's from Poland. You might have heard there's some problematic things going on in that region, but I've been worried about wheat wars for years. And half of the food that WFP provides to refugees comes from Ukraine. So this is, problematic. And what we, this provides an opportunity, unfortunately, to sort of come home, focus at the bioregional level and localize, the things that we need. If you need it, grow it within the bioregion and respond to, what your bioregion can provide and thrive with. I'm going to talk about 4 main types of soil erosion. These are scientific concepts and engineering concepts, but it's really about gravity. We're just talking about basic gravity. So the types of soil erosion, if you're looking out at a field, the first type of erosion that maybe if trees have been cut down, maybe it's been overgrazed, the first stage of erosion is raindrops on top of soil, because when you've removed that vegetative cover and that acts like a shock absorber, now those raindrops are like little jackhammers and they're breaking up the soil and getting it ready to wash away. So it creates a crust on the top of soil. And that's what people often don't understand, is how does drought lead to flood? Well, when you create this crusting of soil, then the next rain event that comes, it means it's not going to infiltrate and it just slides right off and creates extreme water events. So that aggregate starts to break down and turn into particles, which are then easily washed away by both wind and rain. The second stage is what we call sheet erosion. Organic matter and nutrients flow away since the top layer of the finest soil is gone. And we have loss of vegetation and overgrazing that will create bare areas. So those are the indicators. When you start to see bare patches of dirt and exposure of roots. You'll see Javan riverbeds and stream beds where a root of a tree is just hanging out. Like trees don't grow roots into the air. That's not what they do, right? So clearly that, what do we call it? That islandification, where it'll become like a little island pedestal of a, yeah. So those are really clear indicators. Then of course you have a rill, and a rill is when you start to get these little tiny wrinkles and crevices where, don't forget, water, like humans, is really lazy. It will always take the easiest path, right? So once you start to get those little tiny wrinkles and crevices and creases in the soil, that's where water will drop into. And then you start to have concentrations that create erosion scars that we call rills. And then of course, those rills, you've seen, and I know you and I have talked about this, Javan, that triangle of soil erosion, which is like speed, volume, and depth. I don't think it should be a triangle, but it works really well because like you can balance one or the other. But there's a thing missing there, which is elevation. And when a rill, let's say there's a little stone in a rill, when that water passes over the stone and gains energy intensity from the elevation drop, that energy starts to be like a tooth. And one thing that you say, Javan, that I love is that that tooth starts to cut uphill, and it's like it's unzipping the entire watershed so that water and nutrient just fly right out of the system. And of course, gully erosion is what the final stage, and that is where huge ravines just start to split open like Moses on the sea, and just all of that nutrient and water and resources are just flying. It creates like a bowling alley or a superhighway right out of the system. So there's no even time for that water to hang out and moisturize and soak and saturate the landscape. So we'll see examples of these in the presentation. Oops. Oh, I think I missed the slide. So when I'm training communities and governments and farmers, I try to focus their energy on four main components that are sort of the elements of design and regenerative thinking when we're creating disaster resilience. So obviously soil and geology, right? We're digging the soil and organizing the soil and stoneworks and earthworks in order to help plant the rain in degraded landscapes, right? We want to plant the rain before we plant the crops. That's the saying from Zephaniah Peary, who's been highly quoted by Brad Lancaster, that whole concept of planting the rain. We want to generate structures and give boost to living systems. So when we do our earthworks and organize the geological landscape, we're able to now impact water and hydrology. So, water and hydrology, how do we save water in well-structured soils for drier times? This is what we call green water. You've heard of black water or gray water. Green water is that water that is stored deep into those interstitial little nooks and crannies deep inside the soil. And it's passive irrigation, right? We're banking so much moisture that throughout the growing season, water and plants and trees and vegetables and crops have access to that leftover moisture. I focus on spaces a lot because I'm talking about built environment, shelters, refugee camps. I do work very much in forced displacement, and you'll find a Somali woman with, maybe 7 kids, and she has a tiny little iron sheet structure, and it's miserable. She lives in miserable conditions. So how do we harvest the water off of her rooftop, get it into a tree system so she has shade as well as food, maybe fodder, and even in a tiny little space, let's apply that design thinking to engineer the most optimal living environment, right? That's productive and pleasant. Because we're talking in some cases of very, very hot temperatures where people live. And yeah, so then of course you have the plants and biology. I see a lot of people get really excited about the engineering aspects and, either with a spade or earth moving equipment, doing all the digging, but you can't do earthworks without your planting works. And you must immediately be tossing your seed, broadcasting or planting your trees, because you've got to get those root systems in place immediately to stitch together and tie together that soil and that landscape. So don't forget the biology. It's something that I've seen many systems either fail or break because, and it also creates an opportunity for species recovery, agrobiodiversity, indigenous food systems. Let's bring back those ancient seeds, right? Those forgotten foods, those sacred grains, and increase the agrobiodiversity of the agroecosystem. So, I recently produced an animated film, and these are images from that film to help describe to communities here concepts which is not innate knowledge, right? Basically to really break it down, we live on a forest planet and we are forest people. And I don't say that in some funny way, but it's true. I mean, our system is designed that way. The nutrient, organic material goes back into the system. It feeds itself. We are able to harvest that. And so the trees in a system, once they are gone, the leaves fall and feed. Let me put it this way. The long con that I deal with is that soil chemistry is something you have to purchase. The long con is that they don't tell us that the soil chemistry comes from the soil biology, right? So the more organic material, the more those organisms are able to break that down into the chemistry that plants need. So the importance of trees cannot be underestimated for their fungal relationships, the bacterial relationships that create the well-structured soils that protect us from disaster. When those trees started to get cut down, this is something we see so much in East Africa, are bags of charcoal on the side of the road. People are denuding landscapes for livelihoods. It is the most severe form of poverty and the lowest indicator when you see a woman carrying sticks on her head. Like, that is the lowest potential economic activity that you can see a human being go through. That is a massive indicator of major desperation. People have to go out and exploit bush products in order to survive. So this is not a blame game, right? And by the way, the whole entire US hundreds of years ago looked very, very different. And we've denuded the entirety of that. So trees are gone, wind gusts increase, they swirl away with all of those nutrients that are left behind. And so this is a situation that we see all the time, is that those erosion patterns that I talked about turn into soil conditions that just are, braiding gullies, and all the things that you need to grow food are leaving the system. So ecological infrastructure is destroyed, and it literally creates a domino effect of disasters. Food insecurity, water insecurity, animals are dying, livelihoods are not viable, people enter into conflict, we have mixed migration and forced migration, and this is solvable. I want this presentation to feel like a good news situation. We can at a little by little, I'm not trying to sell snake oil or whatever, little by little, we can start to repair and heal those systems with no gimmicks, okay? I'm not a gimmicks kind of person. So again, the main ingredients, soil, water, and plants, the geology, hydrology, and biology. So I'm gonna take us through how we worked with this community in Burundi, in a province called Giharo, and the name of the hill, there was one hill in particular that we were requested to come and address. It's called Kabingo, what a great name. So this is Kabingo Hill, and when we got there, it was just so clear that you can't not address the entirety of the system, right? The whole mountain is a living system. The trees, the soil, the hydrological behavior, the extreme water events, the people living on it, the animals. So this is an entire interconnected, interrelated, interdependent system in its vitality and in its destruction, right? It'll thrive as a system and biological uplift happens as a system, but the destruction and the deterioration is also systemic. We went through many different types of interventions, from focusing on individual trees to individual farms. And what I want to stress in this presentation is that it is, we're not going into strong arm nature with giant concrete structures and dams and you know, what I would call more of a masculine approach. It's more of having many different types of small, many different types of small interventions across the entire landscape. And on that note, when you think about climate change, it wasn't just one thing. You see all these like debates, so is it agriculture, is it fossil, you know, is it energy? Climate change is a result of many people doing many small things, and the solution is the same, right? The reversal of that is many people doing many small things. So that's what the story is about. Before we launch, any thoughts or comments, Javan?
You know, I think what hits me already is that when we talk about some of these interventions, we're always thinking it's got to be big, it's got to be bold, but it really starts with the basics. In permaculture, we talk about patterns to details. And you've taken this pattern of not only erosion, but also individuals that are displaced either externally or internally to themselves and their communities, and said, what is the smallest granular elements that they need to understand and learn, and then slowly started to build that competency. So as they were working on the landscape, which we're about to get into, they built that incrementally. And I think that's really important for people to take away from the beginning here, is that this is not far flung. People could literally learn this from this presentation, if not the potential upcoming workshops and education you'll be offering. It's so matter of fact. And I think we forget that.
Yeah, knowledge is the main input. You know, I'm not into gimmicks and high-tech innovation. This is ancient innovation. It's understanding basic principles of gravity. And I feel like, you know, when we talk about low-tech erosion or permaculture, you know, permaculture and low-tech erosion control has done for science what Jesus did for God, just like, or whoever, is democratizing it, making it accessible, right? Everyone can become a scientist. You don't need to be literate. You don't need to have a degree in engineering, right? You can own this. You got this. And that's what we are trying to tell people who may not be literate, who may have no education, who are totally vulnerable, that they can, using concepts of design and, you know, sharpening their lenses for design, can reduce the disasters and increase abundance. So, okay, so this is the beginning part of our story. All I knew before is that there was a mountain, okay? There was a mountain, it was in Burundi, and it was problematic because it had major erosion, flash floods, and 5 people had died on this mountain. So when we started to learn more about this mountain, we found that it had a big, long footpath that went all the way up the mountain from the bottom to the top. And the thing that we have to understand about footpaths, you know, pathways, even dirt roads, is that through that compaction, we start to create a hardscape that is not pervious and does not absorb water. So water stays on the top and slides right off and accumulates and grows into flood and you know, into extreme water events that become very incisive and energetic with that destructive energy. So there was a footpath going all the way up at the top of the mountain. And then as we started to understand more about how that was affecting the water behavior, there were many, well, we had a lot of different issues you know, on the mountain. Let me just see what I had written as a caption. Oh yes, with the original tree plant and root systems gone, this is a mountain totally and utterly denuded. The original root systems, right, and the leaves of the trees that fall and create that chemistry have been replaced by eucalyptus. So the original soil chemistry has been disrupted. You can't just plant any tree in its place. You know, if you have some ancient acacias or whatever, and just raise those and bring in eucalyptus, grevillea, and pine, which is what Burundi has. Why? Because the government owns the tea industry. They need fast-growing eucalyptus trees in order to harvest them and use them to burn for dehydration of the tea leaves in order to do the commercial sales. So the government incentivizes afforestation using eucalyptus. And again, it's a totally assassinating the soil chemistry because it's a different new biology, different chemistry. So the structure is not the same that it was historically. So with the original tree plant and root systems gone, water is just melting the mountain and taking all the soil and nutrients with it. Water behavior is more extreme with each season as it's incising these deeper and deeper gullies and ravines that create flash floods. And as I mentioned, as we were preparing today for the presentation, Javan, this mountain is a giant mound of sand. Like there's no bedrock. I don't even understand geologically how this thing came to be. And it is just a mountain of sand. Like imagine you're at the beach and you make a big mound, and it had a lot of trees all over it, which were creating soil structure and holding it all together, but those trees are gone. And now the water behavior is just carving that mountain up. So, I'm going to tell the story sort of as you're coming into the community, heading up to the mountain, right? So as you're driving through already through the alluvium, you see this braiding, this erosive braiding, that these are going to become deep gullies. And these are poor communities. They can't afford grading and a sub-base and everything, every single year, but these are economic corridors, right? This is how trade and commerce and people and cargo are moved throughout the region. And so once this infrastructure is compromised, it has a multiplier effect of vulnerability economically and otherwise for the community. So here we are. I was actually if you see that white guy, where's Waldo? That's Daniel Lawton, who came at one point also to help us with some of the interventions, but we literally had to stop. And what the community is looking at is where the road has literally washed away and there's a massive temporary river of water, which is supposed to have stayed on the mountain, right? Historically, it should have just stayed where it was. Water is not supposed to move, Javan. Historically, forests that are a full, thriving, intact forest that has a big spongy forest floor, when a big rainfall comes, up to 90% of that water stays in the forest. Remove the forest, this is what happens. So it's basic gravity. So now we're walking up, we start to walk up the bottom of the mountain, and you can see how the water behavior has become very straightened, right? The fluvial geomorphology is rectifying, and now these are just giant bowling alleys and super highways with water and nutrient just leaving or depositing. So that's a whole nother issue, right? So what you have croplands, people planting their crops, and you have this sediment piling on top of it. So you can see they're trying to mitigate it here. I don't know if you can see my mouse. They're trying to create little tiny walls and little kind of dikes to protect the water from going into the fields. So this is what it looks like as we're moving up. On the lower left-hand corner also, I wanted to just point out that engineers, locally hired engineers by the local government, came and did what's called in Swahili fanya chini fanya juu, which means dig up, dig down, and or dig down, dig up. It's like the name of a swale, but it's not on contour. If you make a bioswale that is not on contour, you are conceiving a new erosion pattern because that water is going to slide to one end. So as we're moving up the footpath, I'm explaining to the team, even where that water, you can see a manual on the left-hand side, is pointing to the exact point where there is a teeny tiny little drop. We talk about the triangle of erosion again with speed, volume, and depth, but the minute water is given the opportunity to fall by a centimeter, it gains energy within that period that it's falling. And that energy behaves like the tooth that creates the head cuts, right? So you can already see how this is what we would call a rill. and how that is, even though it doesn't look like that any extreme water event is happening here, the concentration where that's moving into an incisive pattern is going to become the gully that you see on the right. And this again is where this was the original footpath. So this is the before, basically treat this as a before and after, right? So here on the left is the footpath. You see that gully starting to form. And then on the right-hand side is where it has totally opened up. And the issue here is that people, they can't walk in the gully. So they just scoot a little over to the left. They keep scooting. And then that soil keeps falling and, you know, getting washed away. And then they scoot more to the side. And now they're scooting, and the footpath is increasingly going into the neighbor's farm. And that is another source of conflict, right? Because look at on the right-hand side of that, that's a farmer growing beans and G-nuts. G-nuts are peanuts. They call them ground nuts. So you can see these two erosion patterns where Gilbert, our staff, is standing. Those are going to break off and become a part of the gully, and that all those people who are standing there are going to have to scoot over to the right into that field of groundnuts. Like how would that not cause conflict, right? So it's so systemic, it's complex, and it's really interrelated. So here again, just extreme erosion, and you can see it's very clear that it's the footpath where all that hardscape has collected the water. So here it is again. And don't forget, as I mentioned, 5 little boys have died in these gullies because they're out herding their animals, their shoats, if you know that term, shoats, or sheep and goats. And they fall and drop in, that's actually an industry term. They fall into these deep gullies and have perished. It's really very, very sad. This is why we were invited specifically to come to this community. But if you see bedrock, I mean, there's no bedrock, it's endless sand. It just keeps digging down and down. So as we're coming up the mountain towards the top, this little house right here is the house of a woman named Evelina. Evelina is the topmost farmer in the system. So what that means is that all above her house, it's stony, non-cultivated land. She's the topmost farmer. Evelina is, she is, she's part of the host community, but her husband is a refugee in Tanzania. She's very vulnerable. She has some mental situation, and also she doesn't have strong health. She's acutely vulnerable, but she, being the topmost farmer, we knew it was very important that we use that as the first opportunity to get major amounts of water off of the footpath that passes next to her house and into some type of system that we're going to design. Okay. So I had to include this photo as a joke, wait, is this the real cause of erosion on the mountain? So this little boy was following us everywhere we went, and you can see his little homemade, I don't know if it's a scooter or a Harley or what, but he just rides that thing up and down the mountain. And he may not cause the erosion, but he is a user of the site, and he is actually contributing, like all the other people on that footpath, to the erosion of the site. So what we did, so this is now looking uphill from Evelina's area. You can see immediately how rocky and stony the landscape is. So this is right above her farm where people cannot cultivate. It's just way too rocky. So what we did is we start, this was my first time on the mountain, and the important thing was to get a select few community members to start to introduce the concepts of design, the principles of water harvesting, of soil building, of soil conservation. And so we did that through Evelina's permagarden. She also had water entering from the footpath into her compound, and it was causing major erosion. So we wanted to capture that water and get it into production. So what that looks like is by providing only the basic local tools and knowledge as the main inputs. Again, no gimmicks, only gravity, biology, and citizen engineering. We have locally available tools. We show people how to make basic survey tools so that we can measure and identify the natural contours and patterns of the land. It's what I call window shopping, for pattern. We take a look at the pattern, and then we can decide, okay, what can we do with this pattern? So, oh wait, Gavin, you showed me how to do this annotate. 1 second. draw blue. Okay, so, this is the footpath. Can you see, Javan? This is the footpath that passes her house. And what happens is water was coming down here into her compound. And you can kind of see this erosion pattern. And it was heading into her farm and causing erosion there. So what we did is, how do I undo that now if I want to erase? Well, we don't need to erase. So what we did is we took that water, if you look in the lower left hand, and we want this water to fill up this bioswale on contour. And when it fills up, we made like a little rolling dip here. So when it fills up too much, then this becomes the spillway and it heads away from her house. So again, it just comes down here and away from the house, whereas originally it was entering and going in there. Yeah, using only locally available materials, we show people how to create that sponge that feeds the soil organisms, that creates the nutrients in the food and builds that sponge that retains the moisture and extends the growing season, right? So basically what we're doing is we're creating these long, deep dug beds that are filled with all of these spongy organic materials, and it becomes like a water storage tank with a garden on top. So, you have the bioswale above, just behind where these guys are standing. That's going to harvest water coming off of this this little slope here, soak that into the bioswale, and then water will continue to go downhill. We just want that to happen under the soil, right? Not on top of the soil. So that water will under the soil now move towards the garden bed. The bed itself is on contour. We'll harvest water and we'll retain that water into the growing into the dry season. The more we perennialize and stabilize these systems with perennial plants, then the more we have microclimate, shade, and year-round food security. It's very viable. It's way more simple than people might think. So here you can see on the left, you've got the bioswale. We cover that with a trellis. Javan, I talk about 3 thieves of water, right? The 3 thieves of water are sun, wind, and slope. What I tell farmers is that if you can see the soil, the sun can see the soil, and the sun's eyes are sucking the moisture right out of the soil. So we want to protect from those 3 thieves. All of our design is about protecting from those thieves of water. So here we've got, the bioswale on contour, these double dug beds, and we even, with the A-frame, make sure that the top of the garden bed is completely level so that we don't create any, erosive corners or anything like that. And this was Evelina's permagarden when we finished with it. So you can see we've mulched it, we've fenced it, we planted it. She had some decomposing material that looks acutely black here. But anyway, those are the beds. And the thing with Evelina is, as I mentioned, she's quite vulnerable, and she was actually hospitalized. She was very ill for some weeks. I don't have the after pictures. I'd love to show you before and after. It started to grow. There was food growing. The trellis was becoming covered. But she also has very vulnerable neighbors. And they came in and took what was available and actually destroyed the garden. So these are the kinds of things that, can you blame them? This is why it's important to have perennial systems, right? Because if they had come in and harvested something that was perennial, then it could at least remain. It's a permanent thing that could continue to grow. When she comes back, at least could maybe thrive again. But anyway, it's really important when we're talking about doing community-based approaches, these are the realities, right? We do have a lot of these sort of nuances that we have to factor in. So, okay, in the first phase of this is when I went in and was doing the training of the permagarden, just so that people started to get an understanding of like, okay, water harvesting, wow, we never knew, deep soil preparation, all these concepts. But now it's time to kind of come together as a larger community with some people who already now have a bit of understanding of where we're going with this whole thing, and have an entire community engagement process. So the first step of that was, I'm not an expert on that mountain. I don't know what what their reality is. They're the consultants of their reality, right? They're the experts. They have that experiential capital. So what we did is break the community into teams. And again, we are here with IDPs, returnees, and host community, really like 1/3 of each, working together. So there's also sort of a peace building, community cohesion element as people are trying to solve problems collectively. And we asked them to just give us a snapshot of what is happening in the community. And you can see these women here are pointing. They are very clear. It's not to scale, but this drawing that they have is, it shows the whole story. It shows the water behavior. It shows that, you see that deep red looking highway in the center. That's the major gully and the footpath that we're talking about. So, we started to have a common understanding, a common language around what the problems are, and then we could get to work on some of the solutions. So we marched back up the mountain, and we now, from the concepts of Regina's permagarden, are now doing, sorry, not Regina, Evelina, taking Evelina's land and turning that into a sponge farm. So here, and again, this is not to scale. I'm an urban planner. That's an urban planning joke. So, that we're taking that water as soon as we can, the first opportunities before it starts pummeling down the hill, to turn that into this interconnected fill and spill circuit of her farm, and that is a sponge farm. So, water comes off of the trail into the first swale. It spills into this little obstacle course, and then into another swale, and then down to these what we call smile berms, or water harvesting structures for trees. You can call them medialunas, net and pan. But what I wanted to show is that her house would be somewhere just around here. We couldn't allow that water to, it's a huge amount of water, huge, to come to her house. So what we did is, with that net and pan, we did like 4, 3, 2, 1, and spilling always on this side in the direction of the path. So that what we're doing is we're just sort of borrowing water from its original path and trajectory, banking it, and whatever is the balance remaining, it just continues on its original pathway, okay? So this is Evelina's path water harvesting sponge farm. What happens is that water, this is now where it enters into a gully off of the footpath. And you can see here the team is looking at that. And so we're trying to figure out, how do we stop this water from entering into this gully? And again, Javan, you can see these 2 erosion scars. Those are going to break off. You can see that that's unzipping up the hill. So the same team that had done the sponge, the permagarden, now we're up above her house, and we're going to do an entire farm design. I love this photo on the left, Javan, because you can see 1, 2, 3 women engineering with this A-frame, and then there's this man holding a baby, which is just a reversal of what we see so often. So I was so happy to have captured that. We had a big mix, about half and half men and women. So we are showing them how we, do how we use the A-frame. And here we've taken this entire bioswale that was on contour and dug that into a swale. And then here again, it's such a beautiful landscape. And you can see it's so green, and it looks like it should be healthy and thriving. But if you don't address these patterns, this is a desert to be. I'm not joking. It's, you can you see all the smokestacks? Not as many, but there's smokestacks in the land off in the distance. That's charcoal. Those are trees becoming deserts. So anyway, here we are with the team, and you can see the footpath that goes all the way down the mountain. So here what we did is we just started to ask that water to take a turn. The thing I want also to mention here is, you can't ask water to take a sharp turn, because water, when it slows down, loses its speed, and all of that turbidity, all of that suspended matter drops out. It bottoms out, and it starts to silt up. So this one on the right, I would have actually made it more, I'm scared to do the annotation now. Let's see if we can come back from this. So, what I would have done here is actually gone a bit more diagonal, so that the water could have like a more gentle flow, whereas here it's kind of like, it has too much of a right angle, okay? And that creates more slowing of the water. So you want a gentle turn, so that you're not getting that bottoming out. But what we did do is create a big silt trap, a big, long silt trap on every one of these. You can see here, there's a silt trap here. There's 3 swales. So that water is coming off of the footpath into here. Anything that has collected here is coming into here, and then also in this little interval into there. Does it make sense? Okay, clear all drawings. Now mouse, close, pro. Okay, so this is kind of a before and after, but again, you know, Evelina didn't necessarily have the capacity to continue to maintain the site and the system, but you can see here, this was the before, and now there's this fenced farm. She's got the bioswales. These baskets are bamboo baskets that are tree protectors. So every single one of these baskets contains a tiny little baby tree. Mangoes, avocados, indigenous species, you name it, tons of trees. Here's just another view of what that looks like. So those are, you know, fencing and trellis are for verticality. Farms should not, like, I ask people if it's Jana or the Garden of Eden, whatever your thing is, did that look like a field of maize, you know, and you harvest it and for 6 months of the year, the Garden of Eden is just like a brown field of dirt? I don't think so. They had biodiversity. We don't know exactly what they had. We know they had apples. But, you know, like if you look at the Quran, if you look at the Bible, that region, I always encourage our teams to grow Quranic species, not only the indigenous ones, but those ancient things we knew were growing there for long. So we try, you know, we make a long list of the indigenous biodiversity and try to make a plan for species recovery, because that is the most appropriate response to create the soil chemistry that had the original structure of the soil. So here's just more, you know, we tried to rectify that very straight line with rolling dips. We're creating here the smile berms, the media lunas. So, and again, this is coming from up the hill, so you can just see from the other angle how we're trying to bring that water in. This is a swale on the farm. It has big spillways that we created later that go into these giant smile berms or media lunas for the trees. So you can see, you know, this will spill into these trees, this will spill into these trees, and then there's another swale down below. And then of course the verticality for not only increased growing surface, but also for shading and protecting from the 3 thieves of water. So Javan, take a look at how big and deep these smile berms are. We call them smile berms because that sounds happy. It's like a smile shape. But they're really giant and deep because it's a huge amount of water coming off that mountain. And this is the first chance we've got to like swallow it. So we're creating throats in the landscape to just swallow all this water. And they're sizable, but this is what creates a reservoir, and then we pack those full of mulch, so each tree will have that residual moisture to feed from throughout the year. And by the way, we have massively more, you know, success rates in growing trees than a lot of the tree planting programs. How did humans just not figure out how to grow trees? Like you see, they just dig a hole, stick a seedling in there, and then say a little prayer and leave. No, we're trying to establish an enabling environment so that the system can be regenerating itself as early on as possible. So, you know, again, going to planting the rain from floods to food. So here's just a little bit of a conceptual, you know, schematic of what that looks like, what we would want that to look like. That's Evelina's farm. And all of this goes, you know, I'm trying to promote this concept of sponge farms. This is something that we were to do in Uganda, but it's universal design that I've made. So getting that water off of the road, where it's protecting infrastructure, right? Because these roads have to be graded all the time or they become, you know, just pits of mud that are not passable and market access is cut off during the rainy season. So we want to get that water off. It can be with machines, it can be with hand dug, you know, labor-based earthworks. Get that water in, you know, if you have a chance to make a dam, if you have a impervious soils, like clay. But the point is, it's a fill and spill circuit, right? It's water fills up, spills to the next system, fills up. And in the meantime, it's just deeply hydrating all of that water and turning water from floods to food, or from destruction to production, or from fragile to fertile. So I'm going to pause there for a sec, Javan. Any thoughts on that chapter? Or feedback or comments?
I think as I'm looking at this more and more, it's the simplicity of the process where there's an understanding of prime concepts or first concepts, and then a building upon those concepts, but always landed with integrating with people. It's always about what's the need of the people, what are they looking for. With Evelina, it's you already have a person at risk in a place at risk, and so how do you secure her in such a way so she then has bounty to pass on to others. And then the second thing that I really take in, and I love this about your work, is there's a and in a good way, I think when we say commodification, it can be taken wrong, but in a good way, there's a commodification of these elements to make them owned by the people in their cultural currency. I always talk about this, especially when working with cities. If you don't speak Citianese, like if you can't speak that language, then the city doesn't want to talk to you. And you speak the language of a common tongue where there's smile berms and there's, farms to fertility. And, there's all of these brilliant little sayings that it brings it really to the core of it, because it is a simple process, right? And I think that's what you do so expertly, is bring it very simply to individuals so that way they can get it right off the bat.
It's what I call mental Velcro, right? Like you want it to stick. And so, okay, so thanks for that. So beyond Evelina's farm, let's go back to the top of the system. As I always say, bald men are hot, bald mountains are not. So when you get out of the shower, Javan, do you start drying your body from your head or from the feet? Right? I mean, you start at the head, right? From the head down. So the same thing with this mountain. So what we did is we went to the top of the mountain and we saw trees that were growing. We took our A-frame and made little smile berms, which is a contour-based design, right? You first find the contour, and that is what dictates where the open side of your smile berm is. And then what we do, what we call FMNR, or farmer managed natural regeneration. Simply put, it's a haircut. I just tell them, give all the trees a haircut, and take those lower branches on the understory of the tree, and we want to chop and drop. So we see the green arrow, that green leafy matter and nitrogenous matter, as well as the brown branches that go now into the smile berm. What happens is that creates a biological uplift of the tree, a little growth spurt, and it starts to create that higher canopy that we're looking for, to create dappled shade for to reduce the impact of the erosion from raindrops that we talked about in the first slides. But even around the individual little crops they had, like it was communal land, but people were growing cassava. Cassava is manioc. It's what do you call it? It's a tuber that tapioca comes from. Not agave. In the US, anyway, yeah, so it's cassava. It's a big rhizome root, starchy root. And so even making little tiny micro earthworks around those to help feed the plant. But every opportunity we get, we want to park that water. We want parking lots of water, not super highways, right? So parking lot. And what that looks like in real time, or real imagery, is retrofitting these individual existing trees. So not only the trees that we're planting anew, but even the existing trees, we create a smile berm. And you don't have to dig this. Even if you just take stones, or the I can't remember what you call that, like where you do the straw mulches, some sticks.
Yeah, fish scale straw, vertical mulching.
Yeah, vertical mulching, exactly. So, and then here we're chopping and dropping. We're just trying to give the landscape a haircut and drop all that organic material on the ground. So moving down, here's around the little tiny cassavas, more around the trees. So these are not on people's property. So again, in this particular project, we're dealing with individual homes and the sponge shelter, the sponge farm. But then this is what I call the landscape level, the community level. This land is not owned by anyone, but if you see a tree or something trying to be a tree, just help it out. Then also at the very, very top, we tried to do small scale path water harvesting in the unfarmed fields to get as much water into the soil as possible before it starts pummeling downhill, gaining energy and speed. So, these are teeny tiny little footpaths that we are seeing, but the second you start to see something that's a real, like, just give that create the situation where that's going to turn into the field rather than continuing on the footpath where it's going to just gain more energy and destructive stuff. Then we had check dams on the footpaths. Every 1 meter. We had so many stones that why not? And we have so much water, why not, right? We need to do whatever we can to try to get this slowed down. So every 1 meter, stones, 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 stones. And of course, you're trying to, as we're going downhill, you want the small stones first and then go bigger. But then it's also important to do some kind of skirting, right, at the bottom as well, so that you're preventing that erosive energy on the fall on the other side of the rocks, the downhill side. So again, as we're, and the stones kept changing, like on the top they were white, then they were sort of mixed, so it was just such an interesting landscape. The stone check dams every 1 meter all the way until we reach Evelina's site. And then we run out of stones. Here we are doing one rock dams, ORDs, or poor man's swale, although that maybe sound discriminatory or, but anyway, the point is that using our A-frame, we're just continuing to, do window shopping for patterns throughout the landscape. And then we start to think, okay, we are seeing rills and we're seeing, visible evidence of erosion. So wherever we are seeing that, we want to sheet flow everything out. So we want, what is the opposite of slow, spread, and sink? It's fast, incisive, and superficial. So we're just trying to reverse that here. It's fast, superficial, and incisive. We want to slow it down, spread it out, and sink it into the soil. So here what that looks like is, you can see here, we've got all kinds of different stones. Everything is on contour, these one rock dams. They're a bit hidden in the grass, but you can see also in combination with tree systems and water harvesting structures for individual trees that are mulched and protected. So really looking at the entire landscape, not even on individual people's farms. And I thought I should show some people. So here we've got the team. This is the community members. We try to have fun. I bring speakers. They did away with MP3 players. I had an iPod and now I don't know what to do. But I used to have my iPod with my speakers and we, as we're like carrying rocks, and it's usually a lot of fun. We try to make it a really good time, a positive, just community party. A big restorative party. So the other intervention that we did was pacifying water through gully plugging or making leaky weirs. Is leaky weirs an Australian term? Maybe. Anyway, we want to pull that destructive energy out, plugging up the ravines with leaky weirs using only locally available materials. So here we are trying to, carve them out a bit open so the water has a chance to spread out more rather than being very, very channelized. We actually, can you see the goats there, Javan? Okay, if we had cows, we'd use cows. If we had gerbils, we'd use gerbils. What we had were goats. So we pegged them into the gully. Every goat is tied, and we just wanted their tiny little hooves to, they're not very compactive. It's a bit of a novelty, but you get the point. They weren't hugely effective. But if you had cows in there or larger ruminants, then you can keep them in there for a while to start to press down and compact and flatten out, because what they do is they sort of carve off the soil on the edge and compact it down into the bed of the ravine. And within one rain, I was on the top of the mountain, it started raining and I was by myself having like a spiritual moment. And then as I'm coming down, I could see that immediately it was taking effect. Every single check dam was already having sedimentation, evidence of this collection of sediment and nutrient behind it. And then of course, here you can see already a check dam. The point is to create this pooling, to establish that just momentary extended moisturization of the surrounding landscape. And then eventually that will silt up and terrace off into a stepping. But then, as I told you earlier, I was on top of this mountain conducting this training. Daniel Lawton had to leave back to Australia days before. And I was basically told I have to go right now. And I was on the last plane out of Burundi before they locked down their airspace. They closed the airspace. And so I had just, we had through the training imparted all these skills and concepts to the team. And now I had to depend on my iPhone and my finger art to try to guide them and do remote coaching, remote mentoring, sending them voice notes and videos and lots of drawings, and using all the things accessible to me to help to continue to support them remotely. And this is just an example of how I, how I do that. So here, throughout the whole mountain, whether it's very narrow, deep ravines, or as we go down towards the bottom of the mountain, they widen out. But we're trapping that nutrient. And look, we're only using locally available materials. In some cases, these are banana stalks. Banana stalks are not a permanent thing. It's a vegetable. It's going to rot. But in the meantime, it is activating the siltation. All of those good juicy things like dead lizard tails and bird poop and dead insects, and all those people get trapped, and it all breaks down and creates the enabling environment, those fertile conditions for the recruitment of vegetation, and it just activates this whole systemic uplift. So here we are again, and they do increase the weaving, with more and more sticks, but these are all locally available, free. I mean, we did bring in some materials, but this is nothing that the community can't do on their own, right? And they have been, they're repairing it, the local government's involved. So we also did plant a number of things like vetiver, bananas, lemongrass, food, fodder, fiber, fuel, many different types of vegetation. So here we are again, here's another gully. So all kinds of different scales. It was a huge learning for all of us, every time the ravine takes a corner. So here's after the next rainy season, already you're starting to see it's filling in with all this vegetation, it's silting up. You see this sort of terracing effect. And then of course, Tithonia is something that we were harvesting we had to drive every day 2.5 hours to get to the village. We weren't allowed to sleep. No foreigners are allowed to sleep in the village. It's a very politically sensitive, post-conflict zone in advance of elections. So we harvested all this Tithonia that we planted also in the ravines with cassava, with so many other things. So now it's also a source for food. Right? Not only is the flooding being slowed down, but it's also like becoming a little jungle of all kinds of good green things that you can go and harvest. This one I love because you can see here the gully plug or the Leaky Weir, which was able to create such a cessation of this intensive energy that we now have a situation of land reclamation. People are once again now farming where they couldn't before due to these extreme events. And that is a really BFD, big darn deal, because, this is now, we have more space for farming, people are coming back into those zones. But if you'll notice, they're still doing the same practices that caused the problem in the first place, right? You can still see they're tilling, it's monoculture. And so there is a need for regular, sensitization and working together side by side to just keep the system improving and avoiding those kind of harmful practices. So just really, I'm going to pause there. Any thoughts or anything before the next chapter?
No, I'm struck by the abundance. I'm just struck by what's possible when you finally take that water, you put it into productive use, and you get folks to understand the process. Like it's so readily available. These solutions are readily available. These are not high tech. This is not a massive amount of money that's invested. This is very easily demonstrated. And I think that's why these types of solutions have become so popular. I don't know about you, but working with some of the larger NGOs and some of the UN installations and things of that nature, it can be so much bigger and more potentially cumbersome than it needs to be. And yet this shows just how simple it can be and how effective with simple solutions this can be created.
Yeah, so don't forget, I was given 100,000 USD to do this, but we were also setting up new offices, hiring management. So I would say 2/3 or even half with $50,000 to $75,000 is really what it took to get where we are with this. And, this is a house, this woman is called Mediatrice. And, again, just those principles of that intensive planting, harvesting of water, building the soil, exactly what you're talking about. These are simple things, right? I mean, it's, but once people start to understand, wow, once we just have this diversity and this microclimate, we can be protected from flood and drought and food insecurity. And I, again, want to, reiterate that they reported 100% food increase. This is during lockdown, right? When fertilizers and seeds are not coming in. By the way, I never, ever, 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 ever would allow GMO or improved hybrid seeds that cannot be reproduced again and again and again. So we only brought in indigenous and open pollinated varieties so that people have also seed security, removing them away from seed slavery. We want food, food sovereignty begins with seed sovereignty. So they should be able to harvest and keep those seeds the way that their grandmothers did for thousands of years. And again, it's vertical, right? They're three-dimensional food systems. It's so important to understand that. So again, pumpkins and leaves and greens. Pumpkin leaves are food, by the way. I hope everyone knows that. All of this pumpkin leaves are vegetable. So when we talk about three sisters, people think, oh, it's only the maize, the corn they're eating. No, 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 no. That's a green, micronutrient rich vegetable. So you've got the pumpkin as well as the leaves. All of this is food, 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 food. I love this. I think she's on the phone being like, you can't believe my cabbages. Sorry, quick break. I saw a meme on Facebook that in Kiev, a woman, there was a Russian drone flying outside of her apartment, and she went on the balcony and took a jar of pickles and threw it at the Russian drone and knocked it out of the sky. I just thought of that because I saw the cabbages. So, resilience is the name of the game here. Hold on, speaking of, I have a cat named Mushroom that's making noise over here. 1 second. Oh. Okay, so again, so many different types of food, different types of nutrition, and these are not only for the household, but also for market. And don't forget, this is a community that is under lockdown. They have movement restrictions. No one can go anywhere. Cargo is not coming in. So they not only have food, but they can have income because they're selling, and of course they have seeds which have already been replanted many times. So moving on to the other parts of the story. We had in our plan to also make primary swales, 2 large primary swales across the entirety of the mountain. So what that means is not that they're huge swales, but the special thing about them is that they are inter-farm. So you're having to pull farmers together and say, look, dude, this structure is going to cut across your property, my property. We have to collaborate, and so there's a peace building element in there and a community building element in there. And of course, you have to design for the users of the system, whether that's a car or a camel. So footbridges or any other passage routes or, accessibility has to be designed for realistically who are the users of that site. I'm sure you've been on college campuses. Says do not walk on the grass, and you have these really nice rectilinear gardens, and all of them have footpaths because humans, like crows, will take the straight path. So designed for the users of the site, whether they're college students or camels. So again, collaboration between farmers and community for collective flood and erosion control action. So here's the team. We've got incentive workers, we have our community members, we have volunteers, all working together to create, not massive swales. These are modest little swales, but they cut across numerous farms. And then of course we have footbridges that can accommodate the motorbikes, that can accommodate the livestock that are coming across, but still allow for water to spread out across the bioswale. And then of course, we started with Evelina's farm, but then the idea was to spread out. So we talked about primary swales, and then in our team, we talked about secondary swales. The secondary swales are the ones that are on the individual farms. So here, we have the primary swales, but now we're working with individual farmers to design their own farms. And you'll see that because these all have smile berms, we are heavily emphasizing the agroforestry systems that will root and tie that soil together in place and hold it in place, right? So again, looking at from a smaller farm, this is, I don't know if this is a farm or a garden, so we kind of call it a farden, but here we're designing around this is just a small homestead, but there's water passing through. And so we designed a garden here that, as I mentioned, is a prison for water, right? It's a prison for water because you can see here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 smile berms that spill over into this bioswale. And then here's garden beds and another bioswale and more garden beds and another swale and more smile berms. So water just is like, can't leave. It's a prison for water. It just hangs out, it arrives and it's in a parking lot. And so here's the community around the beds discussing, what they learned. And so now on other farms, these are now larger farms, again, bioswales combined with trellises and tree systems. And, don't forget, every one of these smile berms in and of itself is a garden. It's a guild. I call it like a one tree food forest. You put pumpkins in there and greens and climbing things and just it should be a little micro jungle of food. And here's another example. So that we're getting in bananas and all kinds of different other trees. So I think here they retrofitted existing bananas. So we're coming in and bringing additional support to the systems that are already there. And then, of course, we had this awful situation where I got a phone call that someone in the community had totally scorched some of our work that was on the landscape level, not on individual farms, but where we had done the one rock dams and a lot of the sort of supports with the existing trees. It just, and all got scorched, which is a problem because we spent so much time giving those trees a haircut so that organic material could fall on the ground and build the forest floor. And here it has all gone up in flames. So, again, these are some of the things that happen, and you have to understand where you are and why are people doing this. And the community generally was quite upset, and so there had to be an intervention with local government. And that's not my show. I'm not, they have to come together as a community and figure out who did this. Do they want to have an investigation? How do they want to address it? But that is a 1000% locally driven response to an activity like this. And part of that was the police, who, we had brought the local team had brought them on board because this had happened, this incident. But the police chief was like, as he's taking the report of the incident, he's like, wait a minute, what? You guys are doing what? So he's a farmer, the police chief, and he's like, I want this. So he asked us to actually come and at the police station, establish a demonstration site, train the police officers, who some of them weren't very happy about it, others were, but the police chief wanted every single police officer to have their own garden bed to create kind of a competition to see, who will have their garden bed survive. We did trees, but it turned out to be a sort of a celebratory thing. We engaged with the local, the police station and community leadership, and turned what was actually a really sad thing into a positive and demonstrative action, which was really good. So, when I do the trainings with some trainings with Warren Brush, who wasn't involved in this one in particular in Burundi, but we always talk about the 3 most powerful ways for changing behavior. Number 1 is hands down demonstration, right? If you have a strong demonstration site, that is the best way to have people see and change their behavior. Number 2 is demonstration. People believe what they see. And then of course, number 3 is demonstration. So get it done, get it off the ground, show people what's possible. And there's no other way to convince people. And with the results that they see, people do become very convinced. So with that, I just wanted to end by saying that by having these many small little interventions, within 1 year and with less than $100,000, we were able to completely stop the flooding, the flash floods, and that extreme behavior on the entire mountain. So now the question is, I'm not part of this anymore, and I'm still in touch with the team that is on the ground. I mean, the local community. And they are working with local government. It has spread now to the surrounding mountains. It's the talk of the town. People know that something is going on there. We were really good at doing walking tours with the governor's office and really doing these shared learning dialogues and learning events, bringing in all different types of, state and, local and non-local actors, meaning like public officials and also community members, and doing walking tours, sensitizing them, having little micro learning events. And it has, started to spread at least to 3 other mountains surrounding this one. So, now the question is, will they upkeep it? Will they maintain it? I definitely, I had 1 year. Definitely, I would recommend longer, multi-year programming, but it doesn't cost a huge amount of money. So with that, thank you for your time. This is a picture that I took of one of the kids that says, nothing is as it seems. So amen to that. But thank you for your time. And yeah, that's it. I'll hand it over to you, Javan.
Natalie, thanks so much. Thank you so much for sharing the conversation, the arc, the growth. I think something that I really took away from your presentation was that as you're going through this work, as you're building, you're constantly checking and improving. And I think that one rock dam that you were showing that, okay, yeah, we need to alter this and we need to move this in the direction that is more gentle and pacifies the water. I think those types of conversations we don't see all the time. I think a lot of folks show their work and they say it's the best work ever and it could never get any better. And for anybody who's ever put anything in the ground, that's not true.
Yeah.
I don't remember the last structure I put in the ground where I was like, perfect, nothing. But there's always something to learn from.
No learnings to be had.
Yeah, right. when you look at this as a whole, and all that happened and all that's come, you started to say a little bit more about some of the things you wish you could have done differently. One of them was having longer connection with the folks, having more time to go back. What are other things that come to you in terms of things you would have changed or improved upon?
Territorialism, some people speak English, some people have smartphones, and they tend to be knowledge hoarders. That's a human trait, I think. Knowledge is power. So making sure that you can regularly touch base with women. Don't have smartphones, by the way. It's usually the men, and the men are gonna maybe do activities for their own reasons, maybe for income, and that's traditionally the history of agroecology, right? Women want different 3Ps, different plants and different products at different periods for different purposes. And so women will grow a lot of different things around the house because babies gotta eat every day, right? Whereas men are like, no, we're going to take 100% of the entire lot and just do monoculture for regional and global trade. And that's really marks the masculinization of food systems, from the seeds to the supply chains. And that's really when we pooped the bed as a humanity, was when food systems became masculinized. And so, how do we make sure that we continue to be inclusive, that everyone has equal access to the information and the inspiration and the vision of what we're trying to do, and they have the encouragement, even if it's remotely. You have to engage with local government. It's such a must. And sometimes they change. We had an election in the middle of it. We had a new governor. We had new people in his office. So again, we created a PowerPoint presentation for the new incoming leadership and made sure that they were aware of what we're doing, being really transparent. We don't, in working in these contexts, maybe there could be some suspicions or, I don't know. I think it helped a lot that we had 1/3 host community, 1/3 returnees, and 1/3 IDPs. So that maintained, there wasn't favoritism, that one group is being favored over another. What else? I would have, if I had more time, money, and everything, more support on the seeds. Pest control, pest management, how do you do problem solving? And just continuous, the thing is that with citizen engineering, you really have to, you're sharpening people's minds for design thinking. And that has to be constantly reinforced. Same, even in our courses with low-tech erosion control, there's no rule of, there's no standard design. We're applying principles, not designs, right? So it's a principle-based design thinking that and making sure that everyone is sort of at the same level with understanding those principles. I wish we had had more support to Evelina. You know, she was extremely acutely vulnerable, and, you know, the team on the ground just, for whatever different reasons, you know, I wish that her site was as thriving as some of the other ones, especially because hers is such a key site on the, you know, as the topmost farmer in that system. Well, this wasn't part of the presentation, but, you know, the more people have money, the more we have motorbikes zooming around town, and people don't want to walk up the hill. They want to take what's called a boda. It's a little motorbike, you know, that you can, like a hired taxi. Those motorbikes are so destructive on that soft, sandy soil. Just those track lines of one motorbike, if that soil is soft, you're creating rills. Like, they're driving around imprinting rills in the landscape. So, you know, I mean, there's so many things. My plan was to have national level learning events, and I won't go into why that didn't happen, but we needed to have learning events and shared learning dialogues at the national level around, you know, like I said, their concept of afforestation is totally the wrong thing. Eucalyptus, grevillea, and pine trees. They have no concept of the biology, right? They have no concept of the biology and the importance of it. So I would have had ministers and the office of the prime minister, and let's give some presentations. Let's, like, create dialogue and buzz and evidence-based to share out. The documentation also has been really weak. You know, like, we had a baseline and we did get data, but there has to be more follow-up, multi-year again, right? Because the thing is, with a system like this, once it's commissioned, I mean, you can dig a bunch of things, but until the first rain comes, you're not going to know how the system is going to respond. And it'll shift, and sediment shifts, and something breaks, or berm was weak. So you have to have regular visits and observation and follow-up and repair and maintenance and management of the system. This is not a one-off thing, right? You can't just dig a thing and then see you later. No, it's a constant iterative adaptive management and adaptive learning process.
Yeah. It's always that question, and I think that's the balance between, you know, the practitioner's desire and the realities of the world. I think when I've been in these places where I want to see it go as big and as large as possible, there's always the realities of what's around us. I remember having a stalwart chief in a neighboring village demand a bribe to even proceed with work in a neighboring village. And it was this moment where, you know, the idealism of what you're doing comes up against the reality of the situation, that in so many of these places, corruption and bribery and interactions at that level are so commonplace that there's no qualms about it. And so it's just being realistic with our time. Do you find that frustration in terms of, you know, wanting to get everybody in, wanting to get the bigger conversation happening, wanting to get agricultural ministers and individuals who are able to make change, does the lack of that happening on projects dissuade you, or does that just fuel you up? Like, does that make you more excited and more determined to spread the information?
So it depends. I always say, you know, permaculture's middle name is it depends. Contexts are different. When knowledge is the main input, it's really hard to ask for bribes, because, like, what's a percentage of knowledge, you know? So I think that, to be honest, like, yeah, we have corruption and people asking for bribes all the time, but I think that we gain a lot of street cred and respect from local leadership, because when they see this working, they're way more interested in figuring out how, like, they're like, whoa, what exactly are you teaching? Can I come and be a part of this training? I'm going to take that knowledge, and the bribe that you get, or the handout that you get, the kickback, is this knowledge that will allow you to go and create your own system, which is productive and make money. And, you know, and to the point that it's actually been sometimes frustrating. Like, we do these trainings with staff and people, and you know, we do 2 weeks training sometimes, like with Warren, and suddenly the last day, everyone suddenly asks for leave, and they'll rush home to their upcountry village. And they, like, I mean, when we do the training, I always say I don't hold workshops, I hold work hard shops, right? People are like, well, do we have a packing list? Like, what should we bring? I'm like, bring gumboots and Panadol or aspirin, right? That's all you need. It is so intense. So people go through this incredibly intense training, then they still somehow have the energy to run home and design their own farm. But in one context, I won't say which country it was, but I was so ticked off. What I realized what was happening is that the staff who'd been trained were not actively rolling it out into the programs and integrating it into our projects. They were hoarding it because they're like, this is the holy grail. I am going to create my own farm, and I am going to make a poop ton of money with these principles. And it didn't get passed down into the hundreds of millions of dollar projects that we have in that particular Horn of Africa country. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, it is a reality, but I think that, you know, when people see the potential, that I think for them, it's the benefit that they can get is by participating and learning as much as possible. And then that other stuff that is very real, the bribes and the corruption, all that, hasn't really featured. It's not the alpha thing that's going on, you know? And also people, you know, if you go to a government office and they see the potential of this, you know, that can be their legacy, right? If you're a governor in a desert, dry land, arid and semi-arid land county, and suddenly you've figured out that you can regreen your community and make it resilient to flood and food, and maybe be in the newspaper, and this can be your whole legacy attached to your identity and your political status, that is worth something, you know?
Brilliant. Brilliant. I love that. I think it gives a lot of direction to folks that are doing this work, but also to folks that might want to be supporting this work. Natalie, you've been so generous with your time. Thank you so much for sharing this work. Thanks so much for doing this work. I think you, like I, see it as a all hands on deck situation on Spaceship Earth. And I just so appreciate you sharing your passion, your enthusiasm. You fire me back up, which I love. I love that interconnectivity. And if people wanted to get a hold of you or find out more about your work, where would they do that?
Well, I'm easy to find on social media. So LinkedIn is the best place. My email address is Natalie Topa, NATALIE @gmail.com. No dots or whatever those things are. So I have Facebook groups. I have 5 Facebook groups. One is called Natalie Topa : Permaculture and Resilience Design, which is focused a lot on the food and ecology systems. I have another group called Natalie Topa : Regenerative Communities and Circular Bioeconomies, which I post a lot about. Another passion of mine, which is how we create you know, a built environment with natural buildings, and how is that linked to how we grow the materials in a regenerative and circular way. There's a group called Natalie Topa : the Permaculture Kitchen and Home, because I'm kind of chefy. I like cooking, like food and sustainable food and all that. There's one, Natalie Topa : Seed Saving and Sovereignty, because that is critical. And then the last one is Natalie Topa : Fungi and Mycology. I think you recall I have a cat named Mushroom. I grow mushrooms in my home. I grew up foraging for mushrooms with my Polish family. So those are the groups that just send a request to join. So I think that's it. I'm not a big Tweeter or Instagrammer. I have the accounts, but I'm not that active there.
Awesome.
Thanks also, Javan, because this is the first time that I have told the full story of Burundi and how we did it. So I've never gone to this level of detail on any presentation. And it was super helpful for me to just go back and be like, wow, there's so many things that we did, right? Different types of strategies on a big mountain, just a lot of little tiny different things, which I think is what made it effective.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's that level of detail. It's again that patterns to detail conversation. Let's make sure that we have the concept, and I love that you tied this into the low-tech erosion control course. There's build to fit, but there's never recipe dependent. Like they all have to be so suited, and so it's really about becoming craftspeople who are aware of principles and practices and then suit with what we're seeing, who understand how water moves and flows, to understand parent material and how it erodes, to understand erosion itself, to have some level of social competency so we can interact with people and share our stories. And I think you do this masterfully, speak in a way that everyone can grok and become sticky and has that mental Velcro that just sticks to them and like, oh yeah, I remember that thing because it was funny and enjoyable. And I remember, kind of a side story, but a couple of years ago, I was transitioning careers way before I got into regenerative land care work. And I was helping a group of people to start a whole new snow sport called snow biking in Canada. It's been popularized in Austria for a long time. And I had a chance to work with one of the gentlemen who worked with Burton to develop snowboarding. And he had said something really fascinating that I still think to this day, and you emulate really well, which is when you get a bunch of people together, first and foremost, you have to take care of the logistics. You have to make them feel comfortable. You have to let them know where the exits are, where the washrooms are, when there's going to be break, when they're going to be in. They have to calm their limbic system so they're not in fight, flight, or freeze. They have to be able to calm down so that way they're ready to receive information. Second, he said, it has to be fun. It has to be enjoyable. You have to be playing and be playful and be joking and use mnemonics and, really enjoy the process. And I love this last bit. And he goes, then, and maybe they might learn something. And that last bit, the idea that, here's somebody who helped jumpstart snowboarding that had a huge amount of resistance to it. We don't think about it today, but when it came out in the late 80s, 90s, there was so much pushback. And yet when you make it fun, when you take care of people, it just flows, and you are such a master at that. So I just want to thank you for demonstrating that today. I want to thank you for your presence. I want to thank you for your work and for re-inspiring me. And just thank you for all that you are and all that you do. It's such a pleasure to meet somebody else who feels about this work in the way that I do and communicates it so well. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Javan. Warren always says, put your life's energy into life affirming work, right? Of all the jobs we can do, is it life affirming? And for me, this is my choice of life affirming work. So thanks for the opportunity and sharing it out. And yeah, I encourage everyone, start small, start experimenting around where you are, and that's it. I think for me, there are more solutions than there are problems. And we are transitioning to an ecological civilization, and that's good news. Little by little, we may not make it in time, but we got to die trying. All right, thanks so much, Javan.
You're most welcome, Natalie. For everybody else, thanks so much for watching. If this was enjoyable, feel free to hit the like and subscribe button, not to mention the bell, as well as if you're looking for more of this type of education or this specific tool set, there's a pre-existing course on regenerativeliving.online called Low Tech Erosion Control, and Natalie and I are in talks about potentially offering something in the future. Thanks so much, everybody, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.